All right. Welcome back. I have another video for you guys. I want to sort of dissect, not the entire podcast, but there is a recent podcast that was just released. Dr. Mike Varshavski, the Dr. Mike podcast, he just recently had Dr. Mike Israetel back on. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with either of them, Dr. Mike is a family medicine doctor. He doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of like fitness that much. He's mainly talking about a large breadth of different topics. Whereas Dr. Mike Israetel, he is more on like the bodybuilder front. He is a professor of exercise physiology, I believe. I might be messing that up, but in the Bronx in New York. He's a PhD, just overall great guy, jacked as all hell. And I think overall he's been such a huge net positive to just the fitness community. Besides some of his steroid takes, that's another topic for another video or podcast. But I disagree with some things that he said recently on the Diary of a CEO podcast, which overall great podcast. But Dr. Mike Israetel is super smart, fantastic guy overall. And I think we are all better for having him around. But so he was on this podcast and they got around to talking about some of the causes of obesity. And there is something called trait conscientiousness, which is one of the big 5 character traits. And essentially that's like your ability to pay attention to detail, your self-discipline, delayed gratification. And essentially, Dr. Mike Varshavski, the podcast host, he brings up an experiment called the marshmallow experiment, where they had, let's see here. They had 600 children and aged 3 to 5 years old. And they basically were given a choice to eat 1 marshmallow immediately or wait 15 minutes to receive 2 marshmallows. And basically the follow-up studies showed that the children that were able to wait, delayed gratification, they tended to have higher levels of conscientiousness as they grew up, including better self-control, academic success, and healthier behavior. Now, what he says in this video clip, and I'm going to play it in a second, is that they've had a hard time replicating that result. And so I'm going to play this clip. It's just a 60-second clip of them talking about this. And Dr. Mike Israetel weighs in a little bit on the tail end of it. And so you'll get to hear sort of both of their perspectives. But here we go. I'll see you on the other side.
At the past data, we see that the poorer kids who didn't have marshmallows just grabbed at the first marshmallow and then had lives that were in a position where they had less access to education, to proper discipline, to those things that perhaps poor kids don't have access to, then have worse outcomes. Mm-hmm. So it was like, are we really looking at the delayed gratification, or are we looking at a more systemic issue here? Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting point.
Mm-hmm. The amount of evidence for trait conscientiousness impacting human lives throughout the lifespan is like 1,000,000 times stronger than the marshmallow experiment, of which I'm not familiar with any serious behavioral geneticist that cites research to that effect for how important conscientiousness is. Psychometricians, behavioral geneticists, if you look up trait conscientiousness, how it expresses itself in life, the evidence for its enormous power in guiding people through their lives is overwhelming.
So you see what Dr. Mike Varshavski tried to do there. He tried to bring up one study and say that it hasn't been able to have been replicated. And, that's valid. But when you're looking at research, and I'm going to go through my findings here, because I don't just take stuff at face value. When I hear someone say something in a podcast or a YouTube video, I look it up and I try, is this person actually telling the truth? And so you have to look at like the aggregate of the data. What does all of it say together? Is there a trend, not just this one study that hasn't been able to be replicated? And so Dr. Mike Varshavski brings up the fact that, when they try to replicate this study, they haven't been able to do it. But he's not being exactly honest there, because one of the studies he's talking about, I'm assuming there was a 2018 replication study, Watts et al., W-A-T-T-S. And so this had a larger sample size of 900 children, and it was more diverse. Now, the way that he's not really being truthful there is that while the association between trait conscientiousness wasn't as strong, delayed gratification still correlated with positive outcomes, but was not as strong a predictor as originally thought. So that doesn't mean it wasn't a predictor. It just wasn't as strong as that study that was originally done in the 60s. So that's very important. So listen, I'm going to go through some studies here, and this did not take me they're very long to find. I mean, and I'm assuming that Dr. Mike Varshavski didn't do this, in preparation for this episode. I mean, he seemed like he sort of had an axe to grind when he brought up this topic. Is obesity systemic, or is there a systemic problem? And I think there are both. And Dr. Mike Israetel does say that. I think there are a lot of different factors that contribute to the obesity epidemic, but there is a major one that is conscientiousness, self-discipline, delayed gratification, things of that nature. And this goes to sort of the nature versus nurture debate. Are we a product of the environment that we're born into? And I think that has an effect, but I think ultimately we are the masters of our own destiny. If you want to lay over and just take it up the rear and just say, oh, woe is me, I am doomed because of my circumstances, hey, do you. I'm not here to tell you otherwise, but I'm not going to do that. And I know many of other people that have been born into really terrible circumstances that have ended up amazing individuals. So I'm going to go through some studies here, and I'm not going to go deep into them. I'm just going to kind of give you the gist of this, because the way that Dr. Mike Israetel said that, he made it sound like essentially all of the evidence out there is pointing in the direction of conscientiousness being supportive against obesity, meaning like the more conscientious you are, the less chance you have of being obese. So to get into this, I'm just going to read out the titles and stuff because, again, we don't have time. Typically, when I'm looking at studies, I'll really dive into each study and I'll see, like, is there a bias there? So, like, there was a study, I'm having a chiropractor on my podcast, and he sent me a study. And, of course, I did my own research as well. But one of the studies he sent me, it was a great study, but the chiropractor helped fund the study. And that's something that you can look out for, because that instantly introduces bias into the equation. There's little things like that you can look out for. You can look out for, like, how large is the sample size, who funded the study. Just when you dive into the figures, how are they wording things? There's really weird ways that scientists can word things to make it seem like it's all good, when no, it's not all good. It's mostly good, but there's still, there's a motivation there that we need more data. And if they make it seem that it's all good, that kind of shuts down the conversation a little bit. But anyways, so to start with, we have personality traits and body weight. Evidence, what is this? Evidence using sibling comparisons. The main findings of this, there's the total participant count was 14,000 people. And it says conscientiousness is the only big five personality trait that is robustly associated with decreased body weight, BMI, and obesity risk. So again, I'm not going to go too deep into these. Association of personality with the development and persistence of obesity, a meta-analysis based on individual participant data. And unfortunately, most of this stuff is meta-analysis or just observational data to begin with. It's very hard to do randomized control trials on this type of thing. But so for this study, 78,931 participants, higher conscientiousness was consistently associated with lower obesity risk across studies in both cross-sectional and longitudinal analysis. Conscientiousness predicted lower obesity risk in initially non-obese individuals and was associated with greater likelihood of reversion to non-obese among initially obese individuals, meaning if you were obese, a greater likelihood that you would go from being obese to not obese. Okay, moving on. So personality traits and obesity, a systematic review. Certain personality traits such as neuroticism, impulsivity, and sensitivity to reward are risk factors for obesity. Other personality traits such as conscientiousness and self-control are protective against obesity. Moving on, personality traits and the response to lifestyle interventions for adult obesity, a systematic review and meta-analysis. High conscientiousness and low novelty seeking were associated with better response to lifestyle interventions for adult obesity. Let's see here. Parent-reported personality and weight transitions across adolescents. Let's see here. Higher conscientiousness in 13-year-olds was associated with a lower risk of developing obesity and a greater likelihood of remitting from obesity by age 17. 4,962 participants. So again, I'm not going to go through this, but like I have a list. Like this list, if you could see, it's huge. And I'm telling you, every single one of these studies is confirming what Dr. Mike Israetel just said, that on the aggregate, all of the data, like you can't just point out one study. The vast majority of studies are in support of having higher levels of trait conscientiousness, which again is one of the big 5 character traits. Now, the big question is, real quick, sorry to interrupt. If you're still here, I really appreciate you. If you've gotten any value from this video, please consider hitting the subscribe button and hitting the notification bell so that you get notified every time I release a new video. I release a full podcast every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And also throughout the week, I'm releasing segment videos that could be anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes long, just providing my commentary on segments that interested me that week. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and that's it for me. Back to the video. Can conscientiousness be nurtured? This is the nature versus nurtured debate. And I think it can. I think we are not doomed by our circumstances. And there are, like, if you're going to go on a health and fitness journey, you had better identify your weak spots and nurture those areas, improve in those areas. So I'm going to give you a few ways that you can do that. So before we get into this, so the first one is set clear goals. Start with small, achievable goals to build a habit of goal setting and follow through. So the book, Atomic Habits, fantastic book. I recommend everyone read it. And then also Jordan Peterson talks about this as well. You need to figure out what is the smallest goal that you can set that I always tell people, like, it needs to be so small that you would feel stupid for not having completed it. So like, and this goes for anything outside of health and fitness too. Like if you're trying to read more, then what you need to do is like set a certain amount of time that you're going to read and start with 5 minutes, and 5 minutes might seem so ridiculously small. Like, what is that doing? It's doing something. It's creating a habit, and so you start there and you keep showing up for the 5 minutes. You keep showing up for the 5 minutes. Eventually you can extend the 5 minutes out to 8 minutes and then 10 minutes and then 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. But you have to start so small, because if it's too big, it's intimidating to you. It's much harder to commit to goals that are too big. And the same goes for like larger tasks. If you have a big thing that you need to do, like, I mean, Jordan Peterson has just been so great on this. He talks about, he's a licensed psychologist, and he's helped people with major depression. And so he talks about, like, if you're in your bedroom and you need to clean your room, start with the desk drawer. Again, just breaking it down to such a small thing that it's like, it would seem silly for you to not be able to do it. The next thing is create routines and schedules. So this one is huge. And this is the one that I, as a coach, probably have the hardest time trying to convey to people, is like, you need to get on a schedule and you need to do things at the same time. And one of the major benefits to that is your hormones are cyclical. They're on a timer. So, and Andrew Huberman has talked about this in some of his sleep episodes with Dr. Matthew Walker. I believe he talked about this with him. Again, Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, great book. And that podcast episode that they did 3 hours of just 2 neuroscientists, just amazing conversation and a lot of information to be gained there. But he talks about how our hormones are on, the circadian rhythm. I'm sure you've all heard that phrase, and it's true. So melatonin, which is like your hormone responsible for sleep, and then GABA, which is your hormone that's responsible for, mitigating stress and keeping you asleep also. And then you have cortisol in the morning that is responsible for essentially releasing glucose into the bloodstream and providing you resources to go out in the world and get after it, essentially, because, if you don't have resources, you're going to crash and burn. So those are on a cycle with each other. But when you start to produce cortisol, you produce a pump of cortisol, and that tapers down throughout the day. That is set a timer on melatonin. So as your cortisol is tapering off and it's reaching the end of that timer, your melatonin starts to pulse. That sets a timer on cortisol. And as your melatonin starts to wear down, same thing, cortisol pulses. And so it's important to wake up at the same time, go to bed at the same time, and get on that schedule so that you're not messing with that cyclical nature of those hormones. And the same is true for meals. For example, if you eat at the same time, let's say you eat dinner at 6 p.m. every night. Well, come 5:30, your mouth is going to start watering, your digestive juices are going to start flowing, and it's going to ensure that when you go to start eating, your body is going to make the most out of what you're putting inside of it. But if you're eating at chaotic times, you're just kind of putting food in your mouth whenever, you're not really giving your body a chance to keep up with what you're doing. Workouts as well. So workouts require cortisol, right? Like you need to kind of summon the energy to especially like if you're lifting heavy, if you're doing like a really high intensity program, that requires motivation, it requires will, it requires a high degree of energy. And so you want to do it at the same time so that your body already is in preparation for it. Like, yeah, it's a psychological thing. You can, start to anticipate something, but your body has an innate anticipatory effect as well. And so you can take advantage of that. Like, hey, we're working out at 1 p.m. every day. Okay, well, let's make sure we do that. And so 12:45, you start to feel that pulse of energy coming to you. You start to get kind of excited, that's very important. And that can carry you through some of these, really hard workouts. But practicing self-discipline, obviously, the more you do that, and that's like the delayed gratification point, one thing that I've found is a really useful, easy way of doing this. And it's not really delayed gratification, but I was just talking to one of my clients, Alex, about this, about how when I take a walk, obviously I listen to a lot of podcasts, and, that even though it's educational and I'm learning stuff from it, at the same time, it is a dopamine spike. It's pleasurable to me. It's very enjoyable. And so sometimes I'll tell myself, like, turn the podcast off, and I'll do that. And so just practicing, like, there's something called dopamine stacking, where you're stacking different habits on top of each other. So when I'm running, I'm listening to metal at the same time. So the run is giving me dopamine and the metal is giving me dopamine too. Yes, I like heavy metal. I used to be in metal bands. I'm a drummer, used to be a drummer. Anyways, so that's a double dose of dopamine. And so if I can avoid stacking when possible, that's going to help me practice self-discipline. It's going to help me with delayed gratification. So the same thing, like if you notice that dopamine stacking in your life where you're pairing certain activities together, watching a movie and eating popcorn, or watching a movie, eating popcorn, looking at your phone, triple it up, when possible, cut those things out and practice self-discipline in those very small environments where it's like, okay, instead of watching TV, eating popcorn and looking at my phone, I'm just going to watch TV and eat popcorn. Put your phone away, go plug it up on the charger, get it out of your space and practice that. And then eventually it becomes watching TV without eating popcorn. You're just watching TV, and it's just over time, you can cultivate that discipline. And then attention to detail, that's really important, like take your time with things. I think movement to me is probably the number one way of cultivating this habit where, I spoke about this in a recent video about how we all know the person that kind of stubs their toe on everything, always running into stuff, just kind of clumsy, and that's not saying anything about their character, but to me, that's saying something about they're not conscientious, right? Like they're not paying attention to what they're doing. And so a really easy way that you can start to build up and nurture that skill, because it is a skill in a way, is like pay attention to, are your feet straight when you're walking around? How's your posture doing? Like start to and pick one, because this goes to the habit point. Pick one habit, make it really small so that it's easily attainable. Do it for a week or two and then move on to the next habit. But start off with your posture. Like when you're outside walking around, imagine you have a string at the top of your head that's kind of pulling you up. That's the habit that you focus on. That's the one thing, the attention to detail that you're focusing on. You master that, then focus on your feet being straight. Keep doing that. And then focus on, do you feel your glutes? Are your hips extended when you're walking, which that might inherently occur from the string at the top of the head. But I think you get my point here. And I think ultimately the point that I got from this, Dr. Mike Varshavski, he went so quickly to the systemic point, and that's fine. But I think that it enables people and it takes them out of the equation, and it kind of creates this woe is me environment that I don't think is good. And I want to empower people when possible. So when possible, I'm going to encourage people and let them know that, hey, regardless of where your starting point is, you ultimately are in control right now. And you can start to make decisions to better yourself right now and nurture habits and things that you know are going to improve your life right now. So nurture those things. Don't just give up because of where you started. And that's how you'll have success. And just keep things really small. Start off slow, really simple, and you'll be in this game for a long time. And that's the name of the game. Alex Hormozy, the name of the game is to keep playing the game, right? You just want to keep playing the game. So whether that's one really small habit and keep doing that, just keep playing the game, keep showing up. But anyways, that's it for me. I will see you guys at the next one. My name is Randall James. I am the host of the Always Adaptive podcast. I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel if you enjoyed this video. I'm going to start doing segments like this more often where it's not a part of a podcast. It's just its own sort of standalone podcast. And sometimes I might include it in a podcast. If you're still here at the end of the video, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for sticking around. I just wanted to tell you about one quick thing that I'm offering to help people jumpstart their year going into 2025. So I had a friend approach me and ask me if I had any sort of like one-off starter programs for people to just pay one time and just kind of kickstart them. And so I came up with something for him, and I thought to myself, why don't I offer this to everyone? And so I came up with this package, and what it comes with is one 90-minute session. It comes with a movement assessment and warm-up guidance to basically see what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what sort of exercises should you be including in your warm-up for injury prevention. And then it also comes with an exercise program audit if you are experienced. So that's you giving me your program. I take a look at it based off of your goals. I kind of dissect it and make sure that it's heading in the right direction. Make sure that it's as efficient as possible. If you're a complete newbie, then you get your own program based off of what you have access to, weights in your room, your home gym, or the actual gym, whatever it is. I'm more than experienced with all different types of environments. And then also it comes with a diet audit. So we go through your nutrition program if you are following a diet, and you can get a meal plan. We could talk about that, but typically what I like to do is give actionable nutrition tips that are gonna, something that's a little bit easier to follow. So for example, we might talk about hand portions for their meals. So, you know, a piece of protein the size of your fist, 1 to 2 cups palms of carbohydrate, and then an open hand for vegetables. So that's the program. It also comes with 2 check-ins throughout the month. Those are about 15 to 20 minutes. And of course, it's not that rigid, but the whole package comes out to $170. And I've done the math on this. This is a lot of value. And this is probably one of the best ways to kickstart. And I would really recommend you jump on this fast, because what you want to do is start before January 1st, get some momentum, and then get another surge of momentum going into the new year. So go ahead and email me if you're interested at randall@alwaysadaptive.com, or you can visit my website, and there's a button all over the place where you can schedule a free session, and I can get to meet you, and we can go over options and talk about what's next. So thanks again for sticking around for this video. I really appreciate it, and I will see you at the next one.